Yeah, Stanley, you're making a lot of points, and the points are really very relevant, and I'm writing some of them down. So, in this last session now, you've made a point around fighting for space, which is competition. So, you're saying that as a sports product, you are fighting for space with music, with movies, with entertainment. And you say again that we're not just fighting for space with the physical, we're fighting for space with the virtual. You're saying that we're fighting, and I like that, for the hearts, the minds, the wallets of the consumer. And you're saying that we must have a value proposition that is relevant. And you've identified a big problem. And that big problem is that today, 60% of the African population is under the age of 25. And because of that age range, they are more involved in technology, international consumption, and so on and so forth. So how do we build sports brands that can be relevant for that young audience when most of the administrators of the clubs and the rest of them are old? That is that is really, really critical.
Yes, it's a good question, and I think just even before we get there, one has to take a step back, and we have to be able to crawl before we can walk, and walk before we can jog, and jog before we can run. And the high end of what we speak about in terms of the capacity and where the industry is moving at the moment at a rapid speed. We first have to look at the core product, the quintessential product that's available to us right now, and what the product should look like. And at the moment, unfortunately, the very core product, because the content that we're talking about, the relevance that we're talking about, the engagement and connection with the consumer that we're talking about, can only really be as good as the product showcases it to be. So when I go to a match in Africa, any country, anywhere on the African continent, and I'm going to a local football match, what is my experience going to be? When I get home that night, how am I going to describe it? Am I going to describe it that I went to the stadium and had a fantastic experience, a holistic experience that wasn't just about the 90 minutes of go watch the game, go home? Because these days, people turn things into festivals. These days, events are for people to come together and to connect and to socialize and to feel part of something. So the pre-match entertainment, the in-match entertainment, the post-match entertainment, these are part and parcel of the experience of the global consumer who's spending money in and around the stadium and monetizing the club. The experience on the African continent is not that. The experience is that I'm going to have a nightmare to get to the stadium because of traffic and parking. I'm going to be lucky to get parking anywhere close to the stadium precinct. I'm going to make my way through the stadium gates with pushing and shoving and maybe not as many access gates open as should be. I'm going to come into a stadium that a lot of the time is 80% empty. I go to the bathroom, there may not be toilet paper in the bathroom, there may not even be running water in the bathroom. If I'm lucky enough to be a VIP guest, I sometimes can find I can't even get still mineral water to drink during the game. I should just be thirsty for 90 minutes. There's no snacks or food and beverage available to me. There's no dress codes. The seats are dusty and haven't even been dusted, before the game. We should just sit in our suits or in our clothes, on bird waste and on dust. Now, that's not a pleasurable experience. That's not an experience that I want to take a marketing manager of a major corporation to say, come and invest in me, come and invest in my club, come and invest in the environment that my league is offering you. That's what needs to happen, and that's why I think certainly for us in South Africa, we feel very blessed to have a football infrastructure that has sponsored cup competitions and good club licensing and minimum standards. And you know that if you go to any Premier Soccer League match in South Africa, there's no way that certain boxes can't be ticked, otherwise that club can't play in the league. If you don't provide food and beverage in your VIP hospitality and media areas, you get fined and you get docked. Now, that's the type of thing that, the discipline up and down Africa is not there to enforce that. And the major reason for that is the systemic challenges, that we have in African League football. And, there's many we could talk about, but I think to focus on four in preparation for this talk, I really had to think about, I look at challenges when I go into a territory to work for SuperSport. There's a checklist of about 28 items that I have to go through about the football ecosystem and environment, whether it's conducive to invest into that environment or not. And I've got to go through all of those challenges. But the biggest four, which I'll put to you and the group to really think about. The first thing is, like I just kind of described, is the infrastructure of the match day event. Because at the end of the day, the match day event is culminating in a match day experience. That's what the fan has to buy into. That's what this COVID crisis has taught us, that football without fans, it's not the same product. You can have a television component, you can fake the sound of the crowds, you can put virtual fans so that the screen doesn't look too barren. You can try and create that artificial atmosphere. But the fact is that without fans, there's no game. And, the fans and the players are the two things that need to be at the center point of our thinking. But football has tended over the years to be dominated more by the administrative type of thinking. We're more administrator dominant as opposed to player dominant or fan dominant. And part of that is, as I said, the infrastructure challenge, because we don't have the same facilities and infrastructure that some of the more global leagues have. The African economies haven't been able to, without having to being hosted of a World Cup, for example, where we got fantastic infrastructure. But if you don't have that, you're relying on the government and other kind of spend where there's other needs that sport's competing with. Like I said to you, he's fighting for space. You're also fighting for space in the public arena. The government distributes funds, and it's got to be thinking about education, health and welfare, schools, road infrastructure, and other stuff. So, the sports product, the handball court, the netball court, the basketball court, the football stadium, that's really far down on the agenda. And every now and then you can be lucky enough to have a minister of sport or government initiative which comes along and pushes some advance in some of the more newer stadiums that I've seen up and down Africa. Has been very nice to see. But there's not as much, there's not a proliferation of that. It's the exception, not the rule. Generally the standards of the stadiums are a little bit low on infrastructure. That's number one. Number two is the skills capacity. And I think that's got to, be right up there, right high up there, that very often, and especially for me, I'm very lucky to have dealt with many of the presidents and chairmen of the leagues and the chairmen of clubs. And at those levels, you find that the vision and the understanding, the acumen, and the expertise that's there is fantastic and as good as anything in the world. But when that information and the system and what needs to happen, the execution element, the operational element of the clubs, not the leadership level, the owners and the chairman and the high level stuff, but the implementers of the operations of a club, from the kit managers to the medical and scientific support team, the technical coaching staff, the administration, the marketing, the finance, the legal, the infrastructure around the product. There's a massive skills gap. And we find that, some poor GM of a club is made to be like, the CEO and the driver and the kit manager and the marketing manager. He's pumping balls, he's cutting oranges, he's conducting radio interviews, and he's washing the kit. So the infrastructure of the clubs itself, not just the stadium, the bricks and mortar, but the structure of clubs in terms of the staffing, the organograms, the composition of what a club looks like. And I understand why that one-man show is doing those 5 jobs, because when I was in amateur football, that I was that man. I was the guy fetching, the drinks and washing the laundry for the players and giving the team talk at half-time. I was a one-stop shop. And that's how amateur football generally is. But if we're going to change the mindset and we're going to change the landscape and we're going to have an impact and really, shift the thinking of African football, and I honestly believe that, Dr. Motsepe, who's just been elected as president of CAF, because I've seen through his football club what his understanding of building a brand is. And I'm hopeful that there'll be some fresh initiatives that come in that help us all think about how to bridge this skills capacity, this skills gap between senior management at club level and the leadership of the clubs, and then the implementers of the clubs. That for me is a big challenge. Then the third thing is governance. The lack of corporate confidence in the African football product, because generally speaking, 8 times out of 10, there's going to be a breach of contract, a violation of trust, a breakdown of communication, a promise that was promised but not delivered. And at the end of the day, corporates deal in a very straight black and white world. There's not as much grey as there is in football. But sometimes we'll enter into contracts with one party, and then when another deal comes along that looks a little bit more attractive, we'll find a way, to get the next best thing, as opposed to like sticking with what you committed to, and upholding the name of football. Where every time a club or a player or a sponsor violates a contract, it's a break of the trust of brand African football. When Aubameyang's sitting on the bench for the London derby, and the whole world is told he's sitting on the bench for disciplinary reasons, it feeds into the narrative that, you see, because, African players don't have the discipline. But, when a Croatian or a South American or, somebody else plays up, when Dimitri Payet refuses to go to training at West Ham because he's forcing a move in another country, nobody says, the European, no discipline. When Harry Maguire gets arrested, on holiday in Mykonos for assaulting somebody, he goes back to life as the captain of Manchester United in England. And, if that was an African player, it would be like, how can we keep him? We must let him go. So these are the perceptions that feed into the narrative, and we have to break that narrative through strong corporate governance, through respecting contracts, through under-promising and over-delivering. I think that's a very big aspect. And then the 2 other aspects which round up for me, the starting point of the challenges of African football is then the structure of clubs themselves. There are too many clubs on the African continent that are not privatized. I'm talking about professional clubs now, that are not privatized. They're either institutional clubs or, structured in another way that's not conducive to professional football leagues, professional football structures, the distribution of commercial gains. When leagues sell their rights collectively and distribute the funds amongst their member clubs, this is a legal and commercial, transaction and situation that needs to be governed. And when you enter into the realm of having to deal with, for example, the army or, the Air Force or the police, the revenue service, the governor, when you're dealing with that kind of environment, it's almost impossible to run efficiently as a sports business, because we have to make decisions quickly, We can't wait for the governor to come back from his trip, abroad. We can't wait, to pass through 7 layers of bureaucracy because we're feeding into the military. We need clubs to be able to commit to things, to comply to things, to be governed by things as a central body with our football bodies, with our respective footballers federations, with the Confederation of African Football and with FIFA. So we need to comply with as good a best practice as the rest of the world is doing in the business of football. We can't want to be part of the business eco-structure of football and participate on equal grounds or similar grounds or competitive grounds. But on the other hand, we say, no. But, for us, our clubs are structured differently and we have other complications that make it, impractical and unviable to maximize your commercial gain. And then the final thing is obviously the television product, because the bottom line is, and you've mentioned handball, the real truth is, when you're in a sport that doesn't get so much TV time, you're up against it. You've got a challenge. You've got a funding challenge, because interest and exposure and mileage. Corporates aren't only in sports. Some are for altruistic reasons and with genuine reasons, and many corporates, thank God, up and down Africa contribute to the landscape by being very benevolent and sponsoring things and enabling activities that which or should be the responsibility sometimes of other people, but the corporates come in and they do it. And we've got to gain that corporate trust. We've got to gain it, and the only way we can gain it and add value is by giving mileage and exposure. Now, today we have a very wonderful opportunity that the whole world has become a cameraman. Every single person now is his own TV producer. That's a fact. Your television is your TV production, and if you get the right content, if you get the right shots, if you get stuff that appeals to people, then you get 1 million followers and 2 million followers. Suddenly you're earning money from YouTube and this and that. And you're living in a world that's, is completely transformed and different. So I think that if we can address the systemic challenges and give ourselves a good foundation of consistent governance and confidence from the corporate sector, with an enhanced television product that reflects the gains that we're making on the ground. If we get that right, then money flows as a natural consequence. But when we're chasing and 14 of the 16 clubs are letting you down in your league, in every league, what I've seen is there's 2 or 3 clubs that are doing an amazing job, that are putting in a lot of resource and effort and energy, that are applying strong fundamental principles, of club management and sponsorship management and rights management. They're doing good stuff. But the other 12, 13 clubs or so are bringing them down. And you can only be as strong as your weakest club. And that's how we need to, to be thinking moving forward.